Yeah, and I think we could start at 7:02. Welcome everybody to the Windsor Square Hancock Park Historical Society's Zoom presentation of Paul Williams, great architect. As we know, it's part of the Master Architects of Southern California, 1920 to 1940. It's a 12-book series, and these guys have done 3 so far. This is the 3rd one. Am I correct?
Fourth.
I was close. So this is the 4th. So we're going to do I'm just going to do little details before we get to you guys. So one is I would like to acknowledge any new members. Are there any new members of the Historical Society here, like brand new members? I saw a couple names. Dean Baquette. Is Dean Baquette here? And Dylan Landis? No, they just moved to the neighborhood, so I saw his name on the PayPal. So Dean Baquette and Dylan Landis, and Penelope Cornwall. Is Penelope Cornwall here? And you can unmute yourselves, by the way, for this part here. No, all right. So those are.
I'm unmuted, but I want. Damona had articles in the newspaper about her book, and I just wanted to congratulate her.
Oh, good. Okay, hold on. Let me let my dog out of the house.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm like in the dark.
I'm so sorry.
Damona, congratulations.
Here we go.
Thank you.
Right. I'm Damona. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. I want to bring up one little housekeeping thing. There is, we do these Zoom presentations, and a few months ago, I think it was in January, we started doing a membership price versus a non-member price. We are encouraging all, I'm so thrilled, by the way, we have 35 new members so far, brand new members, since the beginning of January, since January 1st.
I'd also like to say, I'm a new member. I joined in January.
Oh, Roger, I remember you, yes.
Yes, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to go to the events in February and March, so I don't know if you acknowledged me at one of those events, and I wasn't there. But no, I just wanted to say hi, and I'm a new member, and I joined in January. I'm glad to be part of the group.
Wonderful, wonderful. And we're doing, you guys saw today, I sent out from the blog, we're doing the new member spotlight, but we are also doing member spotlight. So we don't all know each other. You know, we know some people who've been in this society for a while, but if you feel that you want to be a new member or member spotlight, we're happy to do that. Just send us your picture, your bio, and I'm thrilled to have it in there. But I just want to bring up the thing about the membership price versus the non-member price for these particular Zoom presentations. So the membership price means that you're already a member. You've spent $45 or $65 to be a member, and you pay $10. If you're not a member, you're $15. Some people who are not members have paid $10 for this presentation. So I just want to say that if you're on here listening to me and you are a non-member who paid $10, we'd love you to go right after this presentation to windsorsquarehancockpark.com to become a member, because we want you to become a member. And if you don't do that, we're going to send a bunch of blue-haired old ladies to your door to get the $5. So I just want to tell you that over here. All right, and I just want to, and also our membership, Marlene Zweig and Judy want me to remind anybody who hasn't sent in their dues for this year, for 2021, that it's May, and almost May, and we would love your dues. All right, so now I'm going to go on to just one more thing before I introduce these guys. So May 12th, Wednesday, May 12th, 2021 at 7 p.m., 5 generations of the Judson family have worked with artists, architects, and designers to create old world style stained glass whose quality and craftsmanship has often been compared to the work of Louis Tiffany. Famed for its craftsman glass Judson arts and crafts era, windows have been celebrated by experts in the field of decades. Judson work with Frank Lloyd Wright in Hollyhock House in the 1920s was recently re-saluted when the house was named in the UNESCO World Heritage Sites list. Established in Pasadena during the heyday of the Arroyo culture, headquarters of Judson Studios are still housed in the original Craftsman era home and studio of Patriarch William Lees Judson. Next month is going to be great. It's all about Judson stained glass, needless to say. I also, before I go on to these guys right now, I just want to predicate this by saying that this book, this beautiful Paul Williams book, The House That's on the Cover, I found out last night, is the home. It's the southwest corner of Lorraine and 6th. It's the home of longtime members Lee and Suzanne Chase, and it's 601 South Lorraine, which we've passed by thousands of times and always admired it. So now these guys are going to tell you all about Paul Williams and all the houses and the beautiful architecture. I'm going to tell you about the guys. Okay, so Masters of Architecture of Southern California by Marc Appleton, Stephen G., and Bret Parsons. So Marc Appleton, where's Marc? Say hello, Marc. Raise your hand. There he is, right next to me. All right, so this is Marc Appleton, is the founding principal of Appleton Partners, LLP, an architectural firm in Santa Monica and Santa Barbara. He has written, published, or contributed to many books, including George Washington Smith, an architect's scrapbook, Robert Winter's Myron Hunt at Occidental College, and Ranches, Home on the Range in California. Marc lives in Santa Barbara. Are you in Santa Barbara right now?
I am.
Very nice. Okay. Stephen G. Where's Stephen?
Yes.
Stephen, raise your hand. Where are you? There you go. You know, many of you might have remembered Stephen G. was our guest speaker at Bullocks, Wilshire when we had the tea there in 2018, when he had that book on City Hall. So
Arkansas.
Yes, and LA City Hall. So we admire him from that. Everyone's still talking about that day. So Stephen G. is a writer and television producer based in Los Angeles. He's the author of Iconic Vision, John Parkinson, Architect of Los Angeles, and co-author with Arnold Schwartzman of Los Angeles Central Library, A History of the Art and Architecture. Most recently, Stephen authored Los Angeles City Hall, An American Icon. Bret Parsons is a very good friend of the Historical Society. He founded Bret Parsons Real Estate in 2008. He has written 4 books, including Cold Court Home, 2008, a biography of the beloved Southern California architectural Cold Court. I'm so sorry.
Cold
Court. He is associate manager of Compass Realty in Beverly Hills office and executive director of its architectural division. Bret resides in Los Angeles. All right, these 2 things. Tailwater Press is publishing this book with Angel City Press. And Tailwater Press was established by architect Marc Appleton in 2000 as an adjunct to his architectural practice. The word tailwater refers to the colder outflow water downstream from a dam and is a term more commonly known by trout fishermen. Are you a trout fisherman, Marc Appleton?
Not as much as I want to be.
Okay. Appleton has said Tailwater Press is known for, I love this part, is known for publishing unprofitable books which nobody in their right mind would publish if they thought they were going to make any money at it. The somewhat esoteric list of publications comprises books about architecture and architectural history with occasional detours. And last but not least, Angel City Press was established in 1992 and is dedicated to the publication of high-quality nonfiction books. The award-winning books from Angel City Press are sold in the gift and bookstores and on the web, drenched in nostalgia, yet undeniably cool. Each Angel City Press book is luxuriously illustrated and showcases its modern design concepts of California's top graphic artists. All right, I think I've said enough. It's time for you guys and start.
Good. I'm going to take over here. Marc and I will start, and then Stephen will take over. Let me do a screen share. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Jolene, that's you.
Can that get undone?
Yeah, hold on one second. Hey, Jolene.
Try it now.
Okay. Like magic.
Yes, great.
One more click. Okay. Marc, I get the pleasure of introducing my co-author and friend, Marc Appleton.
So you're probably looking at a picture of me and Bret here.
A few years
goes
ago.
back many years when this idea for the series germinated. Bret actually wrote a book on Gerard Colcord, and I was a great fan of Colcord's work, and I wrote Bret a fan letter. And from that fan letter, we agreed to have lunch. And during lunch, we both realized that we were both great fans of the architecture of the early 20th century in Southern California and Los Angeles. And we were nutty enough to go out and pay rather ridiculous sums of money for very early issues of Architectural Digest. And our Digest, actually, from the period of 1920 onward, was started by a fellow named John Brassfield. And he really published the work of some wonderful architects, including Paul Williams. But we started the series, this idea for a series, by saying, let's not forget these architects. How do we bring them into the public eye? How do we remember how great their work was and share it with everybody? And so that was really the birth of the idea for the series. Our first book was on Gordon Kaufman, mainly because he was not only a wonderful architect, but nothing had ever been published on his work. So we took that opportunity to right that wrong and publish the first book in the series on his work. The second book was on Roland Coate, the third on Wallace Neff, and the fourth, the topic of tonight, on Paul Williams. How much longer we're going to be able to go with this, I don't know, but we've really enjoyed republishing the work of these almost, in many cases, lost masters. I can't think of a better group of people to be presenting to tonight than you all. I mean, your neighborhoods are the center of a lot of this era and some wonderful architecture. So we're really happy to be on your doorstep and able to do this. I won't tell you about Tailwater Press. You've already heard that it's not a very profitable business, but it's a great deal of fun. It's just a good thing that Bret and I have day jobs. At any rate, you're looking at 9 different covers here of early issues in 1920s and so forth of Architectural Digest. And it was a big format, folio format magazine with rather stunning black and white pictures in it that really showed the architecture. This is in the day when Architectural Digest really was about architecture. And furthermore, it was about architecture mainly in the Los Angeles and Southern California area. It didn't go outside of that area. Brassfield really focused on his local city and this incredible and wonderfully robust and productive era for architects who were practicing at the time. And now, of course, Architectural Digest is international. It's very oriented towards design, interior design and fashion, perhaps more than architecture. But in these days, if you go back and look at these issues, they're full of wonderful pictures of these original houses, and many of these houses still exist today. They've been lovingly cared for and lived in since they were built and designed and built in the 1920s. Regrettably, a number have been demolished and destroyed. And part of our intention in publishing this series was to hope that we won't lose as many of these wonderful, wonderful houses as we have in the past, that people will be aware of them, aware of this legacy, which I think is one of the most wonderful periods of architecture for residential architecture in Los Angeles. Bret, am I handing the torch to you? I've just sort of reeled off these are the 4 books. And I think Bret will take you through each of them in an edited fashion, just so you kind of get an idea of what we have. One of the things I should mention is the reason we were able to do Architectural Digest so easily was that none of this was copyrighted. So it was in the public realm. So if we attentively scanned and corrected these images, we would be able to publish them without paying royalties to another publisher.
Well,
Brad, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. You're looking at the 4 books in the series thus far. We started with Gordon Kaufman, obviously, and interestingly enough, 2 of the covers here are homes in Hancock Park and Windsor Square. I will call those out tonight because of special note, obviously. The house on the cover of Gordon Kaufman, that's the wonderful estate on 6th Street and Muirfield. That's Ted Sarandis's house. He's the head of content for Netflix. It's reported to be the largest square footage-wise home in Hancock Park. It's absolutely magnificent. He and his wife, Nicole, purchased it from Melanie Griffith and Antonio Banderas. It is absolutely fantastic. The second book in the series, Roland Coate, commonly referred to as the father of Monterey Colonial, of the Monterey Colonial revival. And you'll see a couple of homes that he did in Hancock Park tonight. Our third volume was Wallace Neff, certainly a very, very popular architect that most people know. And that house that you see right now, that was in Beverly Hills, unfortunately demolished, which Stephen, no, he won't mention that tonight, but it was unfortunately demolished. And then the subject of tonight is Paul Williams, and that is currently owned by the Chases on the cover, and that's the home that Richard mentioned on the corner of Lorraine and 6th. I think even the trees are in the same position, although they've grown for 85 years, but it's an absolutely magnificent French home that is wonderful, and Stephen will be taking you through that. With Gordon Kaufman, there he is right there. This home is one of the first ones that he did for a Union Bank executive. It's right behind the old Hamburger Hamlet at Sunset on Doheny. Tim Corrigan recently redid it for the current owners. Tim Corrigan, of course, is a resident of Hancock Park. And this is a magnificent, magnificent home that's been published many, many times. Here's the home I mentioned that was on the cover. We always included floor plans whenever we are able to. The floor plans fascinate me, and I think most people really do appreciate them. This is the a rear elevation. This home was also owned by John Cottrell and John Nelson at one point in the early 2000s. He's a noted interior designer. Here's an interior shot. Just the details magnificent. And then, of course, a loggia shot with a floor plan as well. Kaufman was probably best known for Greystone, the entire estate, and you're looking at it right now. Of course, that's on Doheny Road in Beverly Hills. Many, many films and TV shows have been filmed there. And this is actually Santa Barbara. What I love is the shot of that image. It's a focusing device to take a picture that way, through that arcade. It forces the eye where to look, and it's absolutely a magnificent picture up in Santa Barbara. Actually, I believe it's in Hope Ranch. And then Kaufman also did the Athenaeum in Pasadena at Caltech, the California Institute of Technology. I mean, isn't that absolutely magnificent? It still looks that way today. And then he also, few people know that Kaufman also did the Santa Anita Park in Arcadia, and notice that wonderful grill work of the racing horses in this modern design. Roland Coate, the father, as I mentioned earlier, of Monterey Colonial, there he is right there. And the home you're looking at on the cover is in Santa Barbara. Monterey Colonial, it's known for the balcony that protrudes over the second floor. And right here, this is on Muirfield Road in Hancock Park, the Fudger Estate, quite a notable home, overlooks the golf course. It's on the west side of Muirfield, right off of Rossmore. It's just beautifully maintained. It looks as good today as it does here back in the 20s. Here's a side view of a Monterey Colonial home that's in Santa Barbara. Right here, notice the balcony work. And of course, the floor plan at the bottom. This home here is a favorite of mine. It's known as the Jacob Stern House. It's in Holmby Hills. You are all going to know it, though, as Betsy Bloomingdale's home on Delfern. It was dramatically changed by designer Billy Haynes, but that is the courtyard that he would glass in, and you're looking straight towards the pool. Past that pool house is Sunset Boulevard. And of course, a couple of years ago, it was purchased by designer Tom Ford and has been completely renovated, but it is a magnificent estate. But that the Betsy Bloomingdale house started out as a Roland Coat mansion. And you'll all know this. This is on Hudson, just south of Beverly in Hancock Park. This is known as the Gerald Young mansion. This sold last year for about $11.5 million. Magnificent Tudor structure. Easy to drive by. You'll see everything. It's just absolutely magnificent in every way and every detail. This was one of two homes that a very wealthy man commissioned for his daughters, and his daughter had her home on South Hudson. And he also did the home that was best known as the residence of Danny Kaye on San Ysidro in Beverly Hills, more of a Regency style. And then a home that I was in not too long ago that is absolutely magnificent. Coate did the home for David O. Selznick, of course, the producer of Gone with the Wind, and Frances Elkins would do the interiors. Mrs. Selznick spearheaded the entire commission, and she would drive around Pasadena and Beverly Hills looking for a home she loved, and every home she seemed to like was a Roland Coat design, and that's why he was commissioned for the job. That's on Summit in Beverly Hills. Wallace Neff, right there, I mentioned earlier that home on Angelo Drive is no longer there. It was bulldozed by Paul Allen of Microsoft, never to be replaced. It was probably one of Neff's most magnificent structures. It's been in TV and movies many times, so it's immortalized that way, but it is no more. There's the entrance courtyard right there. And then this is the Niblo House, which a Murdoch son owns today. And it's got a wonderful circular motor court. It was featured prominently in a Columbo episode that actually made the house quite famous. It's called Misty Mountain. You'll see several of these styles around Hancock Park and Beverly Hills and Bel Air and whatnot. A French Normandy style, which Neff was quite proficient at. And there's the modified dovecote right there in the middle. This is actually the McGilvray House on Alpine in the flats of Beverly Hills. And then this is Neff's own home in Pasadena. And he also did the Gillette Ranch in present-day Calabasas. Look at the gorgeous views that you had. Again, this was another focusing device through the archway. It tells the eye where to look. It's a framing device that's quite effective. You can actually tour this house. I'm not sure what the COVID restrictions are right now. I don't know if they're allowing tours again, but they will. It's off of Mulholland Highway, but definitely worth a visit. Bob Hope would own this at one point and donate it to the Catholic Church. And of course, another Normandy style, Wallace Annenberg would own this. This is on Ridgedale in Holmby Hills, quite prominent. This was built for a Vanderbilt heir. Frederick March, the actor, would later own it. Just a wonderful, fanciful house. And here's the subject tonight, Paul Williams. Absolutely magnificent in every way. Just a stellar life, a stellar man, a stellar profession. Stephen will give you all the details, but I'm very proud to present this one. And I think if the statistics are correct, it's probably our best-selling book, and we on purpose printed 500 extra copies, or Tailwater did, so that we're well supplied. But it really does tell a magnificent story, and so I'm going to stop sharing. And Stephen, I assume you are going to pop right on.
Okay, cool.
So I want to welcome everyone to Stephen G. There you are.
Awesome. There we go. Okay, hopefully you're all seeing my screen and hearing me okay.
Yes.
Perfect to me.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for sharing your evening with us. Paul Williams' story is remarkable for many, many reasons. For those of you who don't know, he was the first African-American member of the American Institute of Architects and also that organization's first fellow. He was a remarkably prolific architect who worked on more than 3,000 projects in a near 6-decade career. He worked in an incredible variety of styles, and we'll talk about some of those tonight. His former colleague, Jay Johnson, described him as a master of creative eclecticism, and the range of different styles that he tackled was really stunning. One of the things that I didn't realize when we started on this project was just how prolific he was, to the point that the architect and engineer in 1940 would say that perhaps no other architect has had more success in domestic architecture than Mr. Williams. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of how he got started. That was one of the questions we had before the Zoom event started tonight. But Paul Williams was born in Los Angeles in 1894. The population at least according to the 1890 census, was about 50,000. Of that 50,000, approximately 1,200 folks were African American. Paul Williams' father sold fruit and vegetables at a market stand in the plaza downtown. He died of tuberculosis 2 years after Williams was born. 2 years after that, Williams' mother dies of the same condition. He's taken in by a family that attended the same church as his parents. He goes on to attend Sentius Grammar School, where he said even though he was the only African-American kid in his class, he said his main memory was that he was the class artist. Now, one of the important things Williams did while he was at Sentius Grammar School was sell newspapers. And this is important because one of his important clients was Frank Putnam Flint. And Frank Putnam Flint was an important attorney, would go on to become an important senator, and would go on to play an important role in the development of Williams' career. And we'll talk about that in a second. Williams goes on to graduate from Polytechnic High School. At the time, it was located downtown. It had a reputation for graduating a number of working architects in the city. And it was only after graduating that Paul Williams comes face to face with the type of racism that he would experience throughout his career. He goes looking for work, knocking on the door of firms that he knew for sure needed somebody with exactly his skills, only to be turned away and told that they didn't. Fortunately, he managed to get work with Wilbur Cook, an important landscape architect, where he learned to harmonize landscape and architecture. He would go on to work with Reginald Johnson, who was really one of the giants of Southern California residential architecture. He then worked for Arthur Kelly, who is perhaps today best remembered for designing what we now know as the Playboy Mansion. And then he went on to work with John C. Austin. Austin had a hand in Los Angeles City Hall, the Shrine Auditorium, the Griffith Observatory. All of the time through this, Williams is adding to his education at various evening classes and also at USC. Austin is important to Williams' career because it's while working for Williams while we're working for Austin, that Williams in 1922 sets up his own practice. And part of the reason that Williams was able to set up his own practice is because he'd established himself as what he described as a small home specialist. And he did this by entering numerous local and national competitions. And I just want to focus on one of those tonight. This is Paul Williams' 1920 submission to a competition organized by the Los Angeles Examiner to design the best California house costing $3,000 or less. This house was significant because it was actually built in Sierra Madre. It was significant because it got considerable media attention. Williams got to write an article about it. But it's also through studying these early design concepts that we begin to see the early sort of stages of what would become Williams' signature style. He said at the time that in Southern California, the main focus of a house was always at the front. And the backyard, in his word, was for chickens. And in some ways, he reversed that by making the front of the house important, but putting the main focus and embracing the Southern California lifestyle on the back of the house. And what you see in many of his early designs is that the kitchen gets moved to the front, and the lounge and the dining room where you might enjoy the outdoor space at the back of your house goes to the back of the floor plan. This house this competition is significant also because it gets the attention of Frank Putnam Flint, no longer a senator. He's now a real estate developer, and he's purchased a large a parcel of land north of the San Rafael Hills that he somewhat modestly plans to call Flint Ridge. He reaches out to Williams because he's read about him in the newspapers, unaware that it's the same kid that he bought newspapers from all those years earlier. And he hands him a steady series of commissions that would really go on to underpin his Williams's early career. In all, Williams would design more than 32 houses in the region, including the Lewis and Virginia Cass House in 1922, the John Bishop Greenhouse, the Flint Ridge Company House, and later a house for Catherine B. Flint. All of those houses are still there. All of those houses demonstrate Williams' mastery of harmonious proportions. They demonstrate his mastery of many different styles, but they also answer that often asked question about Williams. How is it possible that he came to design so many mansions for so many rich and famous people? And the answer to it in many ways is right here in Flint Ridge, in the sense that he's doing that because of his competition success, because of the pedigree of the people that he worked for, almost immediately from the first day that he opens up his own office. Now, some of Williams' non-residential work that's early commissions include the Second Baptist Church at 24th Street and Griffith Avenue. They also include the East 28th Street YMCA. This building is important because Williams was a cadet at the Y on 9th Street, and he went into this competition to design this building, determined that he wouldn't be considered on any real sentimental grounds. He wanted to be judged on his own merits, but the reason he was chosen to design this building is because it was believed, because of his residential experience, he could give this building a more home-like feel. And this is really the beginning of a trend that you see all the way through Williams' career, when he's bought into non-residential projects because it's believed that he can give them the warm, casual elegance of one of his homes. Which brings us to the first house that Williams designed that was featured in the Architectural Digest. This house was built in 1927, featured in 1930 on South Hudson Avenue. It's the Bachman residence, designed for Walter and Juliet Bachman. This house was actually built on land that was purchased directly from G. Allen Hancock, the developer that we now know as creating Hancock Park. And we often talk about, or you heard it say, that Williams wouldn't have been allowed to live in the houses that he designed or the neighborhoods that he designed. And what did that mean in a very practical sense? Well, in terms of this house, the contract between Juliet Bachman and G. Allen Hancock says quite simply, said property shall not at any time be lived upon by any person whose blood is not entirely that of the Caucasian race. Now, we feature probably around 30 houses in this book. Pretty much every house before 1940 has some language that loosely equates to exactly that. I said earlier that Williams had worked for Reginald Johnson. Reginald Johnson was really known as the master of designing these kinds of Spanish colonial residences, and this house really builds on that experience. Here you see a wonderful Chigurest panel above the main entranceway. Now, I said we'd talk about the eclectic nature of Williams' designs. We're going from a Spanish colonial house to an English Tudor house, this time in Beverly Hills. This house is on Whittier Drive, and it was built in 1929 for Nebraska native Phantom Beerup. Williams was really a master of reinventing complicated historical forms in interesting new ways. Outside of many of his houses, you see numerous historical references, and yet inside they have a thoroughly modern floor plan. This house is interesting for a number of reasons, but it's perhaps most interesting that it still stands when you consider that in 1946, Howard Hughes, famed aviator, famed inventor, famed movie mogul, was flying an experimental X-11 aircraft. He had an engine problem, and he attempted to make an emergency crash landing in the nearby Los Angeles Country Club. He comes up short, and this is one of a number of houses that his plane smashed into. At the time, he was given only a 50-50 chance of survival, but as I'm sure you know, he did survive. I thought it was interesting at the time that Fanchen Berup, her husband, had gained fame as one of the interpreters during the Nazi war crime trials. Now, what's also special about this house on Whittier Drive is that literally next door, we go from an English Tudor house to an Italian revival house next door that Williams designed for Lon Chaney, one of the giants of the silent movie era, the man of 1,000 faces. He was notoriously private, and when working on the design for this house with Paul Williams, he told him to start with the design of the dining room. He was fed up of going to restaurants and watching fans fuss over his every move, even what spoon he was using. I recently got to spend a lot of time at this house, and what fascinated me the most was that it was owned by a woman who had lived there as a child, and her family had later sold the house, and she'd been lucky enough to buy it back as an adult. And Williams put into this house all kinds of special features, like it had a speakeasy, and it had a lot of hidden closets that you had to know how to open. And one of those closets had never been opened because the subsequent owners had never figured out how to do it. And she said to me, I came back in the house, I knew immediately how to do it. I popped the door open, and of course, inside this house, inside this closet, are all of Paul Williams' original plans for this house. And I think the smile on my face when she told me that was literally ear to ear. Now, the same year that Fanchen Berup's house goes up, Williams designs this house for Jack Overcoat Atkin. It was called Overcoat because he never left the house without one. He'd originally arrived in the United States aboard a clipper ship as a teenager, went on to become a successful bookmaker, later a successful horse breeder. And he comes to Williams with this crazy notion that he wants a Pasadena house that looks like a castle that he'd known growing up in England. And I think this is the perfect example to use to really talk about or discuss, how Paul Williams looked at architecture, because you think about this as an architect, that somebody comes to you with a desire to build a house like a castle, and you're known for designing stylish houses. And you may think, well, how do I deal with this guy? And then I want you to think about that problem in the context of a quote in an interview with Arthur Kelly, Williams' former boss, where Kelly says, there seems to be a general feeling among the laymen that the architect will not let them have what they want in their house because it will spoil the architecture effect of it, or some such thing as that. My notion has been to get exactly what my client wants in their houses, but do it in the proper way, so there can be no objection from an architectural standpoint. Now, Williams, later in his career, will say almost exactly the same thing. He says, if I give my clients what they want, then I'm a good architect. And so Williams responds to that request for a Pasadena castle with a house that includes Gothic archways, coats of armor, and numerous other references to nobility, but he does it in a stylish way, a way that is architecturally pleasing. Now, sadly, this house burns down in 2005. At the time, it was owned by Michael Hammer, the grandson of Armand Hammer, who said you could never replace what was lost. And clearly you can see that is the case. I put this house in tonight because it's in your home patch. It's on Fremont Court. It's the Alfred and Ruth Davey house, built in 1930, featured in the Architectural Digest in 1931. It said that Williams was a master at really harmonizing indoor and outdoor spaces. And this 4-bedroom Monterey house totally pulls that off. One of the things I found interesting about this house was that it was Ruth Davey, one of the owners, was an award-winning writer who moved to Los Angeles from Detroit in 1919 when she was 11 years old. And her mother would later marry John G. Bullock. And I'm sure you recognize the name Bullock as really one of the founders of the Bullock's retail empire and Bullock's Wilshire. Now, this house, designed for E.L. Cord, would entirely change the trajectory of Williams' career. E.L. Cord was a famous industrialist. He was the head of the Auburn and Duesenberg automobile manufacturers, and he purchased a 10-acre plot in Beverly Hills that he intended to call Cord Haven. And he wanted to build a house as a gift for his wife that reminded her of the Southern colonial mansions in Shreveport, Louisiana, where she had grown up. He reaches out to Williams because he's read about Paul Williams in the newspapers, and Williams goes to meet him, unsure if Cord shared that common prejudice against him because of the color of his skin. But when he gets there, Williams discovered that what Cord cares about more than anything else is, can you deliver on your promises? So Williams uses a strategy that he's read about in the newspapers that architect Cass Gilbert had used to get the commission to design the Woolworth building in New York City. And that strategy is that he would promise to deliver the preliminary sketches by 4 o'clock the next afternoon. Now, Cord didn't think that was possible. There wasn't enough time. So Williams stayed up all night and he delivered those plans on time. Cord was so impressed that he said, get to work on my house, start with the 18-car garage. You might as well also design my stables. You can design for me an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Cord would bring in factory workers from his various plants to put up expensive hardwood throughout the house and design numerous custom murals and friezes. One of the things that fascinated me about this house was that I spoke to Cord's grandson, who pointed out that all of the furniture in this house, although it looks like it's antique, was actually reproduction. Cord refused to sit on anybody else's old furniture. This is the music room that had soft green paintwork and satin paneling. Williams described it as the most beautiful room in the United States. Sadly, this house was demolished in the mid-1960s. At the time, the Christian Science Monitor described it as one of the most important privately owned estates in the western United States. I included this next house too because it's in your neck of the woods. This is the Goodwin House on South Macadam Place, built in 1931, featured in the Architectural Digest in 1931. It's a colonial-inspired 2-story brick residence, and you see it has a symmetrical facade. It was built for Sarah Goodwin, who was the widow of wealthy oilman James Goodwin, who had died in 1928. And Sarah would live in this house until 1946. But perhaps the most wonderful thing about this house is that it's still there, and it looks exactly like the day it would have been built. So that's wonderful to see, as is this house, which Bret alluded to earlier. It's included in this presentation for 2 reasons. As Bret mentioned, it's on the cover of the book. And it was also, the other reason is that it was really one of Paul Williams' personal favorites. Now, in the time that we've been talking, from what I can remember, we've spoken about a couple of Spanish colonial houses, English Tudor residence, Southern colonial residence, and now we have a house that's a blend of French provincial and French Normandy architecture, a 1933 house built for Henry Collins, who came from Iowa, 5-bedroom, 5-bath house. And as Bret said, it's still there and it's still fantastic. And since the owner is a member of this organization, we should probably applaud her for keeping it in such fantastic condition. Now, you probably got the sense now that Williams is designing houses for the elite of Los Angeles society, the rich, the powerful, the most influential people in the city. And Lillian and Jay Paley, who commissioned Williams to design this residence, described at the time as modernized Georgian, would absolutely fit into that category. Jay Paley had various business interests, but is perhaps best remembered today as one of the co-founders of CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System. You see here the house shows off Williams' mastery of harmonious proportions, but it also shows off a passion that he had for undulating lines, as you can see in the driveway, a feature of his larger estates. The house featured 32 rooms, including this, the games room, this, the bar. One of the things that Williams was very keen on doing was working with the latest, most celebrated, up-to-date interior designers, and he worked on this house with Harriet Schellenberger. He also worked on the design of the pool, which is perhaps the most famous residential pool on the West Coast with Huntsman trout. It includes a zodiac and sunburst design with tiles imported from France. And if you're sitting there thinking, you know, I want to move home and live in a Williams designed house, I believe this house is still for sale, and maybe Bret can correct me, but I believe it's set for sale for around $75 million. So at the time that Williams is working on the Paley's house, he's also working on a commercial commission that would become one of his most famous. This is the Music Corporation of America building in Beverly Hills. Jules Stein, the head of MCA, brought in Williams, again, because he wants the casual warmth and elegance of a Williams residential design inside an office building. Williams responds with sweeping staircases, chandeliers, all of those elegant signature elements that you would expect for him. And he incorporates into his design these two wonderful iron gates that Stein had imported from Scotland. It would go from the glamour of this building to this rather modest house. And you'll probably look at this and you'll think, well, why has this guy put this house in this presentation? You know, it's not a particularly interesting house. It's a modern take on a California ranch home. And it's not interesting until you think that everything that you could build this house with that was made out of steel, the window frames, the paneling, the roof, parts of the foundation, the door frames, are all made out of steel. And rather unsurprisingly, this is called the Steel House. And it was one of two homes that Williams designed for the 1936 California House and Garden exhibition on Wilshire Boulevard and Spalding. Williams was one of only a small handful of architects that was asked to design houses for the exhibition that would actually be built. Other architects included Richard Neutra and Williams' former boss, Arthur Kelly. Williams was the only architect that was invited to build two houses for this exhibition. The Lear Steel Company produced this house with Williams. Numerous copies of this house were sold, and I was recently told and saw pictures of a whole community of these houses in Nevada. The other house that Williams designed for the exhibition was the French house. This time it's steel frame. It's steel frame again, but this time it's covered in plaster. The Architectural Forum somewhat sarcastically noted afterwards that this house was only really French in its vaguely reminiscent roof and the potted plants outside the door. Now, if you'd asked me, you know, what was the most shocking thing? What was the biggest surprise you had when looking into Paul Williams? You'd have to think it was this house. This is a two-story house, again, an English Tudor house that Williams designs for Gladys Lerman. Gladys Lerman was an Oscar-nominated screenwriter. She was a woman making a successful career in Hollywood when it was even more of a male dominated industry than it is today. And she was known for films like Two Girls and a Sailor, Mexicali Rose. She worked on a couple of films with Shirley Temple. We step inside that house, you see a more traditional take on a Williams curved staircase. On the right, you see an oval reception room, which is another feature of Williams' more extravagant work. Now, this house would go on to be owned by Fred Packard, film producer. It would go on to be owned by Robert and June Wyan, who set up Bob's Big Boy restaurant chain. And now, I said it was shocking because at the beginning of this process, you know, Marc and Bret gave me a list of the houses that Williams had designed that had been in the Architectural Digest. And probably the first thing I did was look them up on Google Earth, check they were still there. And then I would drive around all of them. And I drove around to this house. And I got there and I was really kind of hoping to take a picture of it. But I got there and it was surrounded by an enormous fence. And I could hear all this hammering and sawing going on. And you know, and I just thought to myself, well, boy, I've timed this so badly. They're doing some much needed renovation on this house. And I thought, I'll come back when they've finished it. I got back and a few weeks later, Bret emailed me and said, no, they're not restoring that house. They're actually in the process of demolishing it. You know, and it's one of those things that you think, when you understand a little bit about Paul Williams, you think, well, how would that be possible in the 21st century? You know, and yet I did a presentation recently for the Glendale Historical Society, and almost exactly the same thing happened. The Paul Williams house went down, you know, within the last year. So anyway, that brings us to a house that to me is quintessentially Paul Williams. This house screams Paul Williams. You could stick this in any city in the United States and point a finger at it, and even, you know, and say that's a Paul Williams house, even though he's using or reinventing historical forms, even though he's working with the modernized Georgian style, as it was called then, that was fairly common. Once you step inside this house, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. It was designed for Charles Correll. Charles Correll at the time was one of the most famous radio voices in the United States. He was half of a comedy duo with Freeman Gosden for a radio show called Amos and Andy. They both played African-American characters, even though they were both white guys. They apparently made one film together that was a total flop called Check and Double Check. And Correll was later asked, why do you think it bombed? And he said, well, we didn't look the part. Anyway, Correll had been a bricklayer, and he worked with Williams on the design of the driveway leading up to this house. And I said, you step inside this house and you see that it's pure Williams. Now, I want you to focus on the top of these two images, and you'll see to get in this house, you have to go through this oval portico, pure Williams. You go into an oval reception hall, it's pure Williams. And inside that reception hall, we have a wonderful curved staircase, pure Williams. We look at the back of the house and we have a sympathetic porch, and the playroom and the dining room are facing out to the back of the garden, and the kitchen is moved to the front. So you can see that Williams has made the emphasis of this house at the back. And here we see a close-up of that oval reception hall. We see that wonderful staircase. And that leads us on to another commercial project that Williams is brought into, again, to add a more, the warmth and casual elegance of his residential work. He was recommended by E.L. Cord, whose house he designed, to Andrew Gimbel. Andrew Gimbel was the head of the Saks retail empire. Saks wanted to put up a new store in Beverly Hills. Williams went to meet Gimbel, and Gimbel says to him, literally, we want this store to feel like you are walking into a fine home. Now, the exterior of Saks Fifth Avenue, at least the first stage, was designed by Donald Parkinson, who worked with his father John to design Bullock's Wilshire a decade earlier. Williams would work on the interior. He would work on the two subsequent additions to the store entirely by himself. The Los Angeles Times described the interior appointments of Saks Fifth Avenue, Beverly Hills, as the finest of their type in the Western United States. Now, I get to a point where I think, well, I've spent a lot of time talking about Williams designing houses for wealthy people, stores, department stores for wealthy people. But it is important to remember that he was also a socially conscious designer. And in the mid-1930s, he worked on Langston Terrace in Washington, D.C., which is one of the first federally funded housing projects of its kind. And in 1940, he works on Pueblo del Rio in South Los Angeles, a complex of two-story low-rent apartments for factory workers and veterans. And you see here we have clean lines and flat roofs, and the modern, the grid-like arrangement of streets led to almost inevitable comparisons to housing projects in Germany. And this would later be described as Williams' most unorthodox work. But what really fascinates me when I think about Pueblo del Rio is that Williams was the chief architect. So he's the boss. And the other architects on this project included Richard Neutra, Adrian Wilson, Welton Beckett, and Gordon Kaufman. It's a total dream team of Southern California architecture. And by 1940, there's a really noticeable shift in Williams' architecture, or Williams' practice. 40% of his business is now residential, and 60% of it is commercial. And he's asked, well, why the shift? What happened? And he said, well, if you design enough houses for wealthy people, that eventually the commercial projects will follow. Those of you that are architecture buffs probably recognize Williams stood here with A. Quincy Jones, who worked for Williams between 1939 and 1940, who collaborated with Williams on the design of the Roosevelt Naval Base. And in the mid-1940s, Williams and Jones would form a partnership for the purpose of designing clubs and hotels. And they would go on to work on more than 20 projects together that again showed Williams' adaptability, his desire to experiment. I'm only going to include one of them here tonight, which is the Palm Springs Tennis Club, where they transformed what had been a rather traditional structure into an experimental structure that embraced its desert location. They added a dining room, cocktail lounge, and other spaces. It's significant because Williams treated this really as a continuous laboratory of new materials and new techniques. And if you want to see what a partnership between A. Quincy Jones and Paul Williams looks like in a very practical form, we can see here that we've got the wonderful undulating lines in the two-story bar, pure Williams. And then we've got these dramatic walls of glass that are pure Jones. Williams' residential designs evolved in the 1940s to include floor plans with more open floor plans that embraced natural light. Here you see flat roofs, clean lines, but we still have that wonderful curves that Williams is known for in the walkway leading up to the house. This is Tevis Morrow's house that was built in 1947. Morrow was a famous oilman. This house was built in Pacific Palisades, and yet obviously the front is attractive, but still we see the back of the house is really the focus in this house, looking out over this wonderful pool, the dining room and the lounge at the rear of the house. And it includes a wonderful example of the signature curving staircases that Williams is known for. Now, I don't really have time tonight to talk a lot about Perinos, other than to say that Williams transformed what had been a 50 Mart into one of the most in-demand restaurants in the entire Western United States. It was one of those rare restaurants that even New York critics loved. In fact, one of them said that it was perhaps the only sign of life west of the Hudson. I don't really have time to talk about the Golden State Mutual Life Insurance building, the wonderful house that Paul Williams designed for Frank Sinatra, his work on the first AME church, but all of these structures show that Williams had a mastery of modern design. And you can read about all of those buildings in this book that is available through Angel City Press. So that's my part of the presentation. I'm going to stop sharing and I'll hand it back to whoever wants to take it over.
It should go to Richard.
Me.
There you go. And you're going to do our Q&A.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Okay. All right, everybody. That was great. It's really good. That's good. All right. Who has questions for our trio of architectural experts here? Marlene Zweig, did I see your hand rising? Go ahead.
Yes, I would like to know where he lived himself. What kind of house did he build for himself, and where was he allowed to build?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question, because in 1937, Paul Williams writes a fairly sort of controversial article where he talks about the fact that he's designing all these houses for wealthy folks, but every night he goes back to a predominantly African-American neighborhood, goes back to a very modest house because he can't live in the houses that he's designing, even though at that point he can actually afford them. And it's not until, the early 1950s that we see Williams design a house for himself in Lafayette Square that was very similar in many ways to that house I showed you of Tevis Morrow. It embraced modern design. It has a flat roof, but it has perhaps more of those signature curves that Williams is known for. But I think that point about his house is so important, because it's a central part of Williams' story that he's living almost two lives. That he's going back to this very modest existence because of the, very prejudiced racial covenants that exist in the city at the time, and he can't enjoy the success that he's deserved. And it's only in the 1950s when he starts to live a lifestyle more comparable, really, to the level of success that he's achieved.
Thank you, and it was an excellent presentation. Thank you both for that.
Oh, thank you.
Who else has a question? Did I see Connie's hand go up? Maybe not.
Toby Horn.
Yes, Toby lives in a Paul Williams house.
Oh.
Toby, you got to unmute yourself. There we go.
My husband only wishes I could be permanently muted, but we won't. We live in the Miracle Mile area in Los Angeles in what I call a poor man's Paul Williams. It was built for a single man, Roland Howard, and I would come here to visit family friends when I was a young girl. I looked out of the living room windows and I thought, I want to live here when I grow up. And so when Mrs. Nagin put the house up for sale, my husband did not get a moment's worth of rest until we moved in here. And we really don't feel like we're the owners. We feel as if we're just stewards of this wonderful space. I invite the architects and Karen, if she likes, to come visit, because we have still the original brickwork and patio outside, and not much has been altered at all. In fact, we've restored some of the things that were modified in the 1950s and 60s. So if that's of interest, please get in touch with Richard.
Yeah, we'll see you tomorrow.
Only if you drink martinis.
Yeah, that sounds good.
They'll be there tomorrow morning.
Thank you.
Who else? Jane Gilman, do you have a question?
Richard Roger has his hand
sorry.
up.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Roger, you should unmute yourself.
Hi. I'm in my kitchen now. Okay. I had a couple of questions. How long did he live? When did he pass away?
He lived into his 80s. He stopped his practice he stopped working basically in 1973.
Wow. So he was still working until 1973?
Yeah, but one of the things that I really love about, there's so many things to love about Paul Williams, but one of the things I really love is that we have all these sort of interesting periods in Los Angeles history, in terms of architecture. The people that really just love 1920s houses. There's people that love 1940s, 50s houses. There's people that love, the 60s stuff. And he existed in all of these periods.
Right.
And he created relevant work in all of these periods. And, he's one of those guys that you could literally spend the rest of your life studying him and still not run out of things to think about, but, it's incredible that to think that, because of his competition successes, because of the pedigree of people that he worked for, he got up to a very high level very quickly. Once he went out on himself, by himself, and he stayed there. He stayed there for all that time. I think 1922 to 1973, and you're at the top of your game.
That's fantastic.
And you think of that in the context of all the ridiculous sort of obstacles that would have been placed in his way that he would have faced that many of his colleagues wouldn't face it, then it's even more remarkable.
It is. I was wondering, what year did he do the work on Perino's? And at that time, was he able to dine at Perino's?
That's a good question. I'm looking it up in the book. It would say 1949. So I actually don't know the answer to that. I would assume he would, but I don't know if he'd feel entirely comfortable about it. But
yeah, because I thought that was interesting. Perino's was such an architectural gem. It's so sad we've lost it, but it was such a gem. And my final question is, the house you were talking about that you thought they were renovating and then they were tearing down, and from the picture of it, it looked like it was on a body of water.
Toluca Lake, right?
Yeah, Toluca Lake, overlooking the lake. Yeah.
Okay, so that was still that was my question, because I didn't hear if you said it. I must have missed it where it was, but that was Toluca Lake.
Yeah, no, I apologize if I didn't make it clear, but yeah, it literally had a prime spot on Toluca Lake,
right?
Which is probably why it got knocked down, because real estate prices the way that they are, that being a desirable neighborhood, So
yes. Well, the final thing I just want to say, I thought it was a great presentation, and I'm going to go look for the book. Is it at the bookstore on Larchmont?
No, there's
yes.
a link on our website for it, and Angel City will deliver it to you.
Okay. I don't have to go to the bookstore to get it. Okay, I'm going to look for it.
No, please buy local when you can. Absolutely support Chevalier's.
Well, yeah, that's what I'd like to do, because I'm trying to support local, and I really want to keep them in business. But I'll go get it over there.
Is the Chevalier carry this book?
They should, yes. Yeah. So either Chevalier's or angelcitypress.com, and you'll get it very quickly. And speaking of the book, I wanted to mention that Marc had started off the program saying that we are very, very successful at losing money, and I want to affirm that is the case. We're in the red in every single book. We're not even in the pink. We're in the red.
Oh.
And with that being said, we do have the very gracious, lucky sponsorship of fine folks out there. With the Kaufman book, that was Russ Diamond from Snyder Diamond, who was our sponsor. And then he would sponsor our second book on Roland Coat. Our third book on Wallace Neff was Michael Grosswent of All Coast Construction. And then the current book, Paul Williams, was sponsored by Gary Drake, who resides in Brookside, and he's with Drake Construction. And I also want to do a special call out in that, Jeanette and Jeff Wall live in a beautiful Roland Coat on South Hudson. And they were gracious enough to allow us being the Windsor Square or Hancock Park Historical Society, to tour their home about 3 years ago. And I always have to give a special shout out to people who allow that, particularly nowadays when they basically allow strangers into their home. And it was a wonderful tour. Beautiful house.
Yes, it was great. It's so nice to see them here.
Roger, Karen Hudson has answered your question in the chat room. She said,
great.
Yes, he could dine
there
because of his relationship with Mr. Perino. He did because he did his home as well.
Oh, and somebody posted he passed in January 1980.
80. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I was just wondering, do you have any pictures of his house that he lived in? I think he said it was Lafayette Park, correct?
Lafayette Square.
Lafayette Square, which is like kind of round.
He was on Victoria.
But like Hoover, and I'm trying to think of the streets. Where is that?
Crenshaw near Venice.
And St. James.
Oh, so it's south.
One of our members, Eric Flexner, lives in Lafayette Square right there. He's, you might not, Eric, chime in here.
Yes, where is Lafayette Square? Please tell me.
It's right off of Crenshaw. And what's interesting is the reason for the name of that area. It was named after a prolific developer named George Crenshaw, his full name being George Lafayette Crenshaw, whose home is in Lafayette Square.
Okay. Well, if I wanted to drive down there and check out the area, so it's like I would go down Crenshaw to Venice,
it's south of Venice, and then make your first right turn. There's a light.
And that's St. Ives, I think, is the little street there.
St. James.
St. James.
St. Charles.
St. Charles.
St. Charles.
Eric will know.
Because I would like to take a drive and check that out. See, I didn't know that existed.
Sure.
So it'll be very easy to find his house, because as you're coming into the neighborhood off of Crenshaw, it's the very first house on the right.
Okay, so if I take a right off of Crenshaw,
it's literally on the entrance way into the neighborhood. It's all otherwise gated.
Yeah.
There's one entranceway as you're going into this neighborhood of 230 homes.
Yeah.
His house is the first house on the right before you even cross the first street.
Okay, so what's the street I make a right turn off Crenshaw?
Okay. Here, this will make it easy. Right. 1690 South Victoria.
Okay, 1690 South Victoria.
And it's wonderful. Yeah. 1690 South Victoria.
So I would take a right off Crenshaw and Victoria.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. 1690. I'm going to go write this down right now. Okay. Thanks. Great presentation. I'm loving it. Okay.
Good. Thank you.
1690. I'll be back in a minute.
Who's next? Who has questions for our panel? Rita, you must have a question.
Richard? Well, I wanted to say something. I'm trying to figure out what year, and I'm sure that the Windsor Square Hancock Park has done several of Paul Williams' houses, but somewhere you had an open house and a fundraiser in one of those houses. It had to be before 2010, because that's when I had to leave the area. But I remember going in that house, and I remember, that Fluff does that. I used to do it too. We write the history of the house. And that's where I first heard about Paul Williams. And I was so thankful to your organization for introducing that. It was just a wonderful introduction to a wonderful to architect an area.
I was just looking at the Historical Observer for that, and we will be putting that up on the Historical Observer on the website, which Bret's been organizing as well.
Right.
So all the houses that have been researched by the Historical Society were in the Historical Observer as the program, as well as those binders are being put up on the website.
Oh, great.
Hoping to have it done by the end of the year.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Linda says his granddaughter was living there in the late 90s. And Jean Guys has a question. How many Paul Williams buildings survive today?
Well, I don't think we actually know an exact number. It would be certainly fascinating to know that number. I know that Survey LA, part of the city government have done a lot of work to try and qualify what historical resources we really have. But Paul Williams is one of those incredible people in Los Angeles history that the more you get to know the city, you kind of realize that his work is everywhere. It's all around us. So I wouldn't even want to guess at that number, but hopefully, now that his archives at the Getty, now that people are continuing to study, and that somebody will put a number on that, and we'll have a better chance of preserving what's left.
Toby, do you have a question?
I do. In the Los Angeles riots post Rodney King, we know that the archives for Mr. Williams were destroyed. They were on fire in the First Federal Savings Bank. I hope I got the name right. But then more recently, within the last couple of months, we learned and read from the LA Times that other archives had been discovered. So I'm kind of confused in terms of were we misled to think that all of his files and all of his drawings were destroyed in the fire post riots, or was this another cache that had been stored offsite and was just not divulged for reasons of security or other reasons?
Well, that's a good question.
Well, given that it seems that Karen Hudson's, we're lucky enough to have her tuning in, and she was, you know, she is the guardian and has been so careful about protecting those archives. I almost think that she should answer that question, not any of us, because you know she's guided those that collection to the Gettys as the final destination. But
well, Karen says not true. They were never destroyed. Yes, only a few office records were lost.
But it's wonderful that they all still exist. I mean, you can only imagine what the potential is for the Getty and USC in terms of what they will do with that in the future.
Yes.
And I see a question from Jane Gilman. Was the Monterey Colonial style unique to Williams? That's been around for centuries. Roland Coate, basically he perfected the neo Monterey Colonial style in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Been around a long time.
Who else has questions? Who else? Joseph Guidera, you must have a question. Anybody else?
Oops, I've got to unmute myself. Sorry. No, I really enjoyed the presentation. It was wonderful. Very, very interesting. Great job to all the authors. Thank you.
Oh, and there's Karen's there too. I see you. All right. Whose legs are those? Sid. Whose legs are Sid? All right. You guys, this is great. If there are no more questions, we're going to wrap this up. This was terrific.
Perfect.
You know, I know the book is available online. Jim gave us the link for it through our website. I'm not certain about Chevalier, but you know what? Go into Chevalier if you're on large line and ask for the book. That's the best way to get the book in the store, just in case it's not there. All right. So
thank you, Richard.
Thank you for coming. This was a really nice turnout, and thank you, Bret and Marc and Stephen, and thank you, Jolynn, for hosting here. This was a great event.
Okay. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
All right. See you guys. All right.
Great.
Great presentation. Wonderful.